ERP decisions don't fail because of bad software. They fail because of bad business cases. In a market full of AI hype, discounts, and feature noise, CFOs are left trying to separate what sounds good from what drives financial outcomes. Today, we're breaking down what you should demand from an ERP business case in terms of time, clarity, and control. Welcome back to the Admiral Consulting Group podcast. I'm your host, Mike Lordi, and today we're unpacking that assumption. To break it all down, I'm joined by Dominick Zappia and Ben Lane of the Admiral team, who help companies modernize their business every day. Let's dive in. Gentlemen, how are we doing today?
Mike, how are you?
I'm well.
Excellent. So let's start by clearing the noise, the things that sound compelling but rarely hold up under financial scrutiny. What does a weak ERP business case, what do they usually get wrong?
Is that for me, Mike, or for Ben? Or either of us can answer it?
Either one. This is open floor, guys. There's
Okay.
no back and forth. This is not a debate. Okay. This is
Okay.
just us talking, being very informative, enjoying ourselves, and have at it, guys.
Well, I think then there's a few things. The number one thing is clients ignore process change. So in other words, they assume that once they implement the software, that all their problems will go away, which some problems will go away, but they don't think about redesigning their workflow. Sometimes you have to, you need to redesign your workflow in order to have automation. You can't take processes that are just completely inefficient and put them into the software. You need to think about redesigning how you flow things out. The other thing that they typically will kind of get wrong is the training, the data migration, kind of going back to what I said with the workflow change management. That's often overlooked. So again, you just can't plug the system in and think all your issues are going to go away. It really takes it's a few different components that all make it come together.
Yeah, they're selling, capabilities instead of the outcomes, and they're really focusing on, like Dominick said, what the system can do and not what the business can do or should do differently to, adapt into the new technology and also maximize the functionality of a new system.
And a lot of people are guilty of this because it's time consuming, but just quantifying the results, or quantifying the savings in time, error, elimination of errors, things like that. So, that's important too, because you need to see, you need to quantify the value of the implementation once it's done.
And you mentioned value now. A lot of these first year discounts that are out there. Why are first year discounts often noise?
A lot of companies are, they want to get the software license. So it's like anything you buy today. They entice you with a discount up front to get into the game. And typically, especially with ERP, the chance of changing after you have it in for a year or two is slim to none, because it's such a, it's a challenge to change your ERP software every few years. So they figure once you're in there, they got you. So, oftentimes people fall for the, you sign a 2-year contract and we'll discount it 50%. But, again, that doesn't take into consideration the long-term, cost of ownership, because now, those first 2 years are really just discounted. Now, how about year 3, 4, and 5? And support for that. So they really need to not be, they need to think about it. The discount sounds nice, but it's always not that way in the end.
So if that's the noise, let's shift to what actually matters, where ERP starts to show up in time, efficiency, and real financial impact. How should a CFO expect their ERP to impact order to cash speed, and what metrics prove it's actually improving revenue velocity?
I think with that, it's the amount of manual interaction you have. In other words, your order to cash, the amount of manual process you have with that should be eliminated. So you want to have, like faster payment processing from your customers, get out your invoices more quickly. Your cash application should be more efficient. So just that process from going from an order to collecting money should be seamless and completely automated. And that's where that benefit will come in. So I don't know if Ben, you have anything to add to that, but that's kind of where you'll see that.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly what you're saying, removing the delays between every step, because that faster order processing, then faster invoicing, and you're getting cash faster or completing that cycle faster. And you want to move from a traditional or older ERP that's really just kind of recording that order to cash process and starting to accelerate it or automate it.
Your days outstanding and your day sales outstanding, will be reduced so that you bring the cash more quickly. And again, the order to cash cycle will just be much more efficient than it would be if you're doing it manually. And that's typically what we see, especially with distribution companies, things like that, where they have order processing, there's inventory involved. Oftentimes it's just a big manual process. Sometimes people are taking paper from one department to another, which is crazy, but
and this is an everyday occurrence too. This is not just once a week. It's every day they're doing this.
Yeah, and especially if you're like an e-commerce business, and for some reason you don't have those orders coming right into your ERP, and you're doing that like manually, or you're doing it in batches. I mean, that's very time consuming.
That's delay, and then that could be delays, and then everything gets backed up, and that's the start of something bad.
Exactly.
Right. So what should a CFO expect in terms of system integration so that orders, fulfillment, and invoicing flow, without manual intervention?
Well, you should have, it should be a real-time sync between sales, inventory, and finance. So that integration should just kind of be out of the box. It's not even an integration. It's just a synchronization of the various functions that happen in the ERP system. Now, if you have a CRM system, that should also be integrated into your ERP system. Some clients may take the order, all depending on your process. Some clients might take the order in a CRM system, but then it pushes over to get fulfilled into the ERP system. So if that's your business, process, you want to make sure that that's integrated. And then to the warehouse, you want to make sure that's integrated. So all of these different processes should be synced so that it's all happening in real time.
So all these different systems working together essentially in one ERP system. That's the ultimate goal.
Correct.
Yeah. Yep. Working together. Yep. Eliminating those manual touch points, where there's delay, error risk, like Dominick mentioned, people, sometimes taking a piece of paper to the other department. You also don't want your ERP system to just replicate that process in a different way, and you're transferring it or rekeying it into another system. You want to kind of automate that order to fulfillment to invoicing and minimize that need to rekey or the delays that come with rekeying or potential errors.
Sure. Let's say Bob in the warehouse is on vacation and somebody can't understand what he's putting in, but if it's all in one system, it's right there. We're not relying to go and track down any discrepancies or anything like that. It's all in the system.
Exactly. Yep. And it's it just it eliminates a lot of bottlenecks and risk of placing of putting in a wrong order or wrong pricing or anything like that. And then at the end of the day, it brings the cash in quicker because of that whole process is well automated. You're going to get that invoice out quickly, and hopefully the client will pay you quickly. It's really important to have that information synced together. Oftentimes we don't see CRM synced with the ERP. That's probably the area that we see the least amount of integration, which by integrating it, you'll get much more efficiency.
Okay. And now what should a CFO expect from their ERP in terms of reconciliation, speed, and accuracy to ensure business is always close ready, right? Everyone's talking about that, year-end, month-end close. What can they do to ensure that?
The reconciliation is going to be a lot more automated, and it's going to be more accurate. their ledgers will be, updated because everything is just flowing. It sounds redundant, but if your reconciliations will be done more quickly, more efficiently. So you can match, your payments to your invoices to your journal entries without, having to do it manually, which we see that often where people are doing it manually. Especially when we're going in and doing discovery, they're considering a new ERP. That oftentimes we see that manual intervention, and oftentimes we see that their ledgers aren't updated, especially if if they have multiple systems and they're not talking to each other. It just becomes a complete mess. And then at the end of it, your reporting is kind of useless because you really can't start drilling down into detail and things like that because everything is nothing is working together.
And I'm sure you've come across this where you'll hear somebody say, "Oh, I can't talk to you this week. I have to do my close," because it takes so many days. So, how should CFOs quantify shortening close by like 2 to 3 days?
Well, I think they have to. I'm knocking my mic over, Mike.
Yeah, you're very excited about this, Dom. You're
I'm
very
knocking my
passionate
mic
about
over,
this.
Mike.
Yes.
Um, if the financials are always aligned, um, so they're always ready to close. Oftentimes, you hear, like you said, Mike, you hear people go, I'm in my close. Your close shouldn't take 5 days. So if everything is aligned and the data is accurate, that should just be routine doing your month end close.
Now, we mentioned before about the manual reconciliations that some companies are doing, but I don't think CFOs and companies realize what the hidden risks are when you do a manual reconciliation. Do you want to touch on that a little bit?
Well, it reduces errors. It is probably one of the main things. You're able to quickly identify those errors as well. If there are errors, you can identify them when you're doing it. You automated that process. There's less having to go in and look at it, like doing an audit, if you will. So I think the biggest thing is the accuracy of the data.
Yeah, and the immediate ability to find those errors or see those errors, essentially in real time instead of, a few days later or even a few weeks or months later, errors surfacing and then having to go back.
Right. And it gives you, having that information allows your reporting to be more quickly available and more accurate because that, we say this all the time, garbage in, garbage out. So if that data is done, if that is done in real time, the reconciliation, now your reporting can be done more quickly and maybe identify, from that reporting, maybe identify certain things that may not have been identified until, a week later.
Right. Now, have you ever come across a CFO that, it takes them 7, 8 days to do a close and they're okay with that? Now, do you have like follow-up question? Like what follow-up question should a CFO ask if they're doing this a close and it's 7, 8 days and they think it's okay? I mean, y- I don't know if they see what, the risks are in that. Do you often, what do you say to a CFO, with that mindset?
The real question isn't really, does 8 days work for you, or shouldn't be phrased as, is this 8 days working for you? It's more of a, what are those 8 days costing you? How many decisions are being made before the numbers are final, or decisions do you need to make in those 8 days? And then how often are those decisions wrong, or they have to be delayed because of the, extra 8 days to reconcile?
That's a great point. Great point. Yeah, and I'm sure they're not thinking of that angle. So now underneath most of these inefficiencies is something every finance team relies on. Excel. I use it. I love it. It's great. But let's unpack where that could become a liability. How should a CFO evaluate whether an ERP is lowering the cost to serve, especially through customer self-service and reduced internal touch points?
You need to take a look at whether the ERP reduces the amount of manual dependency with customer interactions. The other thing is how many touch points you have for each transaction. Because these are all things that have an impact on the overall cost of the operation. So I'm not sure if I'm answering it.
Yeah, like touch points are cost, and they want their ERP to remove those, not manage them or put them in a different system where they still have to occur.
Yeah, we see more clients, like more distribution type clients putting in self-service portals so that customers can go in and actually do some of the work themselves. No different than, you go into the supermarket and have to bag your own groceries.
Which I know you love to do.
Yeah, I'm completely against that. So, 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 by having the customer go in and put some of the onus on the customer, they can go in, they can place their orders, they could do their returns, they could access their invoices. So, again, it's just throw everything back on the customer and and improve your efficiencies.
So how should CFOs calculate the real cost?
I guess one way is monitoring or measuring the time spent resolving, issues and inquiries that become more prevalent. So I think, I think that's one area that could be looked at.
Forecasting, reporting, consolidation, that's all kind of where the strains with Excel start to show up over time. And it's
Right.
the calculating that dependence or cost is, like you said, the duplicate efforts or correcting errors, and the time just pulling in and cleaning up that data, making it make sense.
The other thing to take into consideration with Excel is, if everyone's working off different Excel spreadsheets and they're not synced up, and that could become a nightmare. You may not, one person may be looking at an Excel report and another person is, and they're not up to date with each other. Especially if everyone has their own Excel reports. So that becomes an issue. So does compliance.
Yeah.
Inconsistency. Again, errors. So there's, Excel's a great product. People are not going to stop using it, but reliance
There's
on
risk. There's risk in using it, essentially.
We find a lot when it gets to the reporting. Everyone, like you said, has their different Excel reports or how they like to see it type of thing, and it's not necessarily standardized. So even just between the different preferences, there can be errors and such. So
Yeah.
having the centralized, reporting really helps a lot.
And once you start removing that friction, the real question becomes, can you actually trust the numbers you're taking to the board? So with that, what should a CFO expect in terms of operational data flowing into forecasts so that the projections are grounded in real demand and not assumptions?
Well, this is interesting because oftentimes, depending upon the customer, well, you should always be feeding the forecast with real-time information, not historical data. But with that said, sometimes the ERP isn't the best solution for forecasting. That's why they have financial planning and analysis tools as well. So sometimes, if you want to do what if scenarios, or if you want to do headcount type of analysis, things like that, sometimes, the ERP is not going to be able to handle that. So you may want to look at other solutions for that, like basically take the data from the ERP, plug it into an FP&A product, and then do all of your forecasting and planning there. One of the benefits, though, is if you're able to get your forecast out of the ERP, having everything tied together, your orders, your sales, your production, your inventory, all that data is automatic, then obviously you're going to have real-time operational data to do your forecasting. However, sometimes that forecasting is done in ERP and sometimes it's done outside the ERP. It really depends upon your requirements and your depth of forecasting that needs to be done.
What breaks first when companies outgrow their accounting system?
I think one thing is reporting.
Confidence in that reporting.
Yeah, exactly. Because especially if you have multiple systems, then forget about
Yep.
reporting. It just becomes a nightmare. And if you have multiple entities and need to do consolidation, that could also be, a breaking point for some accounting systems, especially like a QuickBooks. That's where, intercompany transactions, things like that. Now, you're using a QuickBooks or, more of an entry level type of solution. Consolidation, intercompany transaction processing is very laborious, especially doing it in Excel, which is quite common.
And when you spend all that time and uncover an error after all of it too, you have to do it over or do it twice. It
Right,
it gets even more intensive and breaks trust or morale in the team
right,
or in the
right.
numbers.
And then, your reconciliations as well become delayed, and as we spoke about a few minutes ago. So there's a lot of things that break first when you outgrow
Mhm.
your accounting system. But the big thing at the end of the day is you don't really have good visibility into your business.
And how should a CFO expect their ERP to reduce the cost and risk of AP through automation, approvals, and workflow discipline?
Well, that's an area any client can immediately gain efficiency with, because without a doubt. I mean, we have so many clients over the last 5 years who completely automated their AP, capturing invoices through OCR, then workflowing the invoice for approval. Then if there's discrepancies, they're quickly alerted. So AP is a slam dunk for automation. I mean, quickly can be done, lowers the cost of the processing, faster payments. You eliminate or reduce at least operational risk. And a lot of these AP solutions, they're really the cost of them. The cost to do automatic data capture um, is really based on the invoice volume. Typically, that's how they're making their money. So, depending upon how many invoices you're processing a month, that's how much they're charging you monthly for the solution. But AP workflow, and then we see more clients also doing automating or outsourcing the payment processing as well. So instead of doing the payments internally to the vendors, they outsource that part of it as well, which becomes part of the AP component, and you have that option. And in other areas, we're seeing more frequently automated is direct integration with the bank. So instead of uploading an ACH file to the bank, the software, in this case, Business Central, talks directly to the bank. So you don't have that upload of a file and things like that. And those things drastically improve on, efficiencies around accounts payable processing.
So far, everything that we're talking about, I mean, the time savings alone seem to be at least worth exploring because all this automation is just a huge time saver, and CFOs and other departments can concentrate, in other areas essentially.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
because a lot of the things we do, or a lot of the things finance teams do is like data entry and process. Instead, it should be more of analysis, um,
Hmm.
you know, planning for the future of the business. Like they get caught up in the weeds with doing the day-to-day things that the right software can easily do automatically and efficiently, and spend more time, especially with Copilot now in Business Central. What you can do from an analytics and reporting is just tremendous, and that's really where the time should be spent, instead of doing these manual processes that could easily be automated.
You mentioned the reporting and the forecasting. So, what separates historical reporting from forecasting trust?
That's a good question. Um,
We could come back to that. It's
all
okay.
right, um, just so I understand the question, like you're saying,
What separates the yeah, right, the historical reporting from forecasting trust?
well, I think having consistency in the data obviously is number one. Um, Not relying so much on the spreadsheets, um,
Mhm.
and then being able to do those reconciliations. So, just having clean data that's validated will will handle that.
So if the board asks for a revised forecast tomorrow morning, what separates signal from noise? So basically, what should a CFO actually require before, this ERP investment?
A weaker system that we've touched on, with the manual rekeying and reports and such. If they ask for a revised forecast, the whole team's got to go back and rebuild it. So that 4-day, 8-day process now is an 8 or 16-day process, delaying decisions further and or still leading to incorrect decisions. Whereas that strong system that's built, rebuilt and has the foundation, it's just an they're just changing the numbers or pressing enter again, like in the office to recrunch them. But
Yeah,
it's a much faster process.
I think you hit the nail on the head on that one, Ben.
Okay. So how should a CFO evaluate whether their ERP is truly acting as a single source of truth versus forcing teams to reconcile across multiple systems?
Well, I think going back to what we spoke about earlier, the going from the order to cash cycle is one area. How quickly you get an order into, how quickly you got the invoice out to collect the cash. If you're closing more quickly, your financial closes aren't taking 8 days, as we mentioned before, and just discipline of reduced manual effort, especially in AP and AR. There's so many things you can do even in AR from a collection standpoint, from an automation, especially with Copilot or with other tools that are available in the ERP that automatically will send out emails saying, hey, it's been
Yep.
31 days since you paid this, you haven't paid this invoice. So there's just so much capability in ERP systems today that clients use. Maybe I don't even think they use half of it.
No.
And they don't know what they don't know. So, and Microsoft's constantly making enhancements to Business Central,
Yep.
almost to the point where it's hard to keep up with them sometimes. So there's just so many things that can improve operational efficiency and things like that for the CFO. Um, but I
Becomes
think
that single source of truth.
right, right,
No
yeah,
no going back and forth between the systems.
yeah,
Single version of numbers that all match and line up. And like Dominic said, everything we've talked about so far is kind of what should be demanded with the faster closes and reporting, and also that real-time data. Then even with AP, forcing it or not forcing it, adapting it from a process into like a controlled workflow, so it's the same every time, same approvers, same data, where the source is. And you have those strong controls and auditability and such over time.
yeah. And we get so many calls. I mean, we just got a call, I guess, a couple days ago with a client that they have 40 different entities, and they literally have 40 different QuickBooks and sessions. Like each entity has their own QuickBooks,
Hmm.
which is crazy.
Wow.
And they were, I maybe exaggerated, maybe it was 30. It was a
Well,
financial
30 is better.
company,
Yeah.
and it was, yeah, it was just nuts the way they were doing this, and it can all be pretty much eliminated by implementing, a business central with the intercompany processing and things like that. They were doing all that in Excel. It was crazy how they were doing it, and came to the conclusion that they need to do something.
And you wonder how like CFOs, why does it take that long? Like once you get to maybe 10 instances of QuickBooks or 20, wouldn't that kind of raise a red flag and wait, I need to call somebody. This isn't right. This doesn't seem right. So
Yeah, I think, yeah, yeah, at some point you would think that, but this was like I forget what they call it, like a private. It was what do they call that? Family wealth or family. It was a person who had millions and millions of dollars, and the company was just managing his money, buying real estate, investing, things like that. So they're really just managing his money.
and
Um,
what's the name of this gentleman?
I honestly don't know, um, but you see those kind of clients, where the it's a family. They have lots and lots of money, and they're constantly making investments, buying property, buying businesses. And they, have a small finance team doing that, which
Sure.
is, understandable if you got,
It
tens
becomes
of millions of
the
dollars.
routine or
Hmm.
the habit. They're just you get comfortable with it after 5, and you've got a clear cut process for the next 5, but then
Right.
you hit 15, 20, and realize it
Good.
can't scale, or it's taking too much.
Right.
True.
Right.
Very, very, yeah, good
And
point.
it's hard to, especially in that particular case, you have data all over the place. It's hard to make a decision on things. Should I invest here and invest there, because you're just navigating between systems to put, and then extracting it and putting in Excel, then doing analysis there. So it's crazy.
You've
Right.
got to ask Bob on the beach to fax over his documents during vacation.
All right,
Yeah.
I'm going to put you guys on the spot now. All right, we covered a lot today. If CFOs demanded only 5 things from an ERP business case, what should they be?
Faster close and reporting.
Yeah. Just like lower operational cost, I would think, of employees doing things manually.
Also flexible and scalable.
Yeah. And that's a good point, because one of the things with ERP is you don't, even though there's a lot of functionality in a product like Business Central, you don't necessarily need to, roll it out in day one. You just need to know that the capability is there to, to roll it out when it's needed, and you don't want to
That
overburden the.
really, yeah, removes your constraints of working kind of within boundaries on an old system, and changes your future outlook to, okay, what do we need to do to grow into this, or take advantage of that other
Right.
configuration or module.
Right.
what else
Right.
can we what else can we automate instead of spending time trying to make it work?
Right. Yeah, it's like, a lot of clients, they'll take the Band-Aid approach, instead of like looking at the issue. They'll just, it's almost like you go to a mechanic and your battery's always going dead, and he's constantly replacing the battery, but he never looks at the alternator to say, oh, that's really why the battery's going dead. One of those scenarios. So
Hmm.
how was that for a mechanical reference? A
That's
mechanic,
very good. Very good, Dom. Very
very
impressed.
impressive.
Yes.
So it's kind of the same scenario where they're just plugging holes instead of like taking a step back and looking at all their processes before they implement.
Well, and some of these companies, they might not worry about how they're doing things internally, as long as they're getting things done, and it may not be the most efficient, but it's getting done. And then later on, they look at, okay, how can we improve internal? It's like your house, where the last room you have painted is like your master bedroom, because nobody sees
Right.
it, nobody cares. So you kind of just, it is what it is. Um, but I do think that CFOs, this is very enlightening for them to see where we could, save time and ultimately save money by implementing these.
Right, and it's kind of what I mentioned, I think, when we were doing another show. The younger, the younger CFOs, if you will, get it. The olders are happy with, using Excel, or doing things in a more manual process. So and I know I said this some other times, but you see that when new younger employees come into a company, they really look and say, hey, how the hell this company was doing this way for all these years, I don't know, but we need to embrace some more technology. And we see that not just in finance, but even in, distribution companies. The order processing, inventory management was a very manual process. I mean, literally on paper. And now, if you don't have a advanced system in place, it's going to be hard to find employees, unless they're all like me and just, don't mind. But
Hey,
think,
Dom, you still like to use Post-it notes. It's okay. We got
yeah, exactly. So I still have a feather pen with an inkwell. So, um, but seriously, if you're trying to grow the company and your technology is outdated, it's going to be a challenge to find good people.
So if your ERP isn't reducing time, improving clarity, and strengthening control, It's not delivering ROI, it's just adding complexity. The best systems don't just record what happened, they accelerate how you decide what happens next. If you're evaluating ERP, demand outcomes, not features. Gentlemen, I want to thank you for joining me on this podcast. And for everyone listening, for more information, you can visit our website, www.admiral-usa.com, or call Dominick personally on his cell phone as he's eating his spaghetti and meatballs. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
You forgot his number. You got to give him his number.
We'll see you soon.